Steve Jobs once said the problem with Microsoft was that they had no taste. The line comes from a 1996 PBS documentary, Triumph of the Nerds, where Jobs said that Microsoft's only real problem is they didn't think of original ideas and didn't bring much culture into their products. For Jobs, taste was the ability to make good choices that reflect quality, restraint, and human usability. He argued that Microsoft optimized for market dominance and lacked a guiding vision or philosophy. Now, of course, Microsoft has been hugely successful in the personal computing market. They've dominated Windows and Office, and right now you'd have to say they are unbeatable. But this year, Microsoft has made some colossal mistakes, which have pissed off the users and their enterprise customers. And whether this is terminal or not remains to be seen. But in my view, what Jobs said about Microsoft is just as true in 2026 as it was in 1996. So in this video, I want to explain why Jobs was right then and how you can see this playing out right now, because it all comes down to chips.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste, and what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way, in the sense that they don't think of original ideas, and they don't bring much culture into their product.
In 1996, Apple was in serious decline, losing money and market share, while Microsoft's Windows 95 gained near total dominance of the personal computing market. Jobs himself was on the outside, not yet back at Apple, so his swipe at Microsoft was dismissed as sour grapes. But just a few months later, Jobs returned to Apple and the great transformation began. Apple set a big trap 6 years ago when they abandoned the Intel X86 chips in favor of their own chips built on ARM architecture. I'll explain ARM and X86 architectures in a separate video, but for the moment you can just assume that they're two competing design philosophies, like cars built with combustion engines and cars built with electric engines. Apple Silicon, or the electric engine, proved unequivocally that ARM could deliver far better performance per watt than the X86 architecture used by Microsoft and Windows. Users experience this directly in terms of battery life because the Apple machines stay cool and silent. But users also feel ARM indirectly as well, and this is where Steve Jobs talks about taste, because Apple trades some of the performance gains in its chips to deliver things like animations and displays and effects. And these might appear trivial or gimmicking on the surface, but it's these little tweaks to the user experience which can make a whole world of difference. And that seamless experience Apple provides is because they control the whole stack. Now, Microsoft saw what was happening, but they couldn't just switch. They had decades of enterprise software dominance in applications and systems, all built around X86. And while they ignored ARM and tried to squeeze more out of the X86 architecture for a while, but it didn't work. The X86 was designed in 1978 when the bottlenecks were different. So Microsoft had no choice but to concede defeat and move eventually to ARM. So in February 2026, Microsoft shipped Windows 11 version 26H1. This was a special build that runs only on Qualcomm's new Snapdragon X2 chips. It's not a normal update because it sits on a different, newer code base. And that's because Windows didn't have the low-level platform code needed to run Qualcomm's next generation silicon. So Microsoft forked its flagship operating system to support the new chips, while still supporting the old ones from Intel and AMD that power overwhelmingly the majority of desktop enterprise applications. But to put the toe in the water with Qualcomm and ARM, they had to write an x86 emulation layer to keep all that legacy software alive. Windows on ARM can run native ARM applications, and that ecosystem is improving, but it still has to preserve compatibility with decades of x86 and x64 software that runs through emulation. And that emulation means that they're running fundamentally slower than on Apple Silicon because there's this extra layer of code that's simply not there for Apple. This would not have been an easy decision to make for Microsoft because now they've absorbed real cost and complexity supporting two different code bases. You don't do this if you're comfortable with your technology choices. You do this because there's a chance you're going to get left behind. Microsoft's competitive advantage is now its competitive disadvantage. The X86 software moat that kept competitors out is exactly the thing that makes it slow and expensive for Microsoft to follow Apple into ARM. That strength didn't reverse into a weakness through error. It became a liability because the environment changed. and the very depth of the moat that they'd created has now come back to bite them. This is the innovator's dilemma. The asset that wins the last era is the anchor that slows you down in the next. So this year, Microsoft is not behaving like a company that's in control of its destiny. It's behaving like a company that got comfortable and complacent on X86 until it watched a competitor eat their lunch. And now they're spending like a drunk sailor to remain relevant. Microsoft has realized they don't have the chips to deliver on-device AI. That's a race they know they can't win because they're starting years behind Apple. So now this is why I believe Microsoft has gone so hard on cloud AI. They can't win on device, but they can win on the cloud. So Microsoft has poured billions of dollars into OpenAI and turned a research project into a grand social experiment. But they have to do this before Apple's chips become good enough to take workloads off the cloud. And let me tell you, as somebody building in this space, that window is closing very quickly. Microsoft's choice for X86 lock-in was their moat, and Microsoft spent decades defending that moat rather than questioning whether it was still the right technology choice. For them, the very thing that made them unbeatable was far more important than understanding what users actually wanted. And we see this by shoving Copilot into every menu, panel, and right mouse click. It's the arrogance of a company that still believes that users have nowhere else to go, so they can push whatever serves Microsoft, and you just have to suck it up because it's for your own good. It's this absence of taste which Steve Jobs had nailed. It's optimizing for your own market position instead of the person who's actually using your technology. And that's always been Microsoft's blind spot. So predicting the demise of Microsoft should not be controversial. It's just the playbook they established coming to a natural end. They achieved their goal of a computer in every office and every home. And they did that with a moat that they could defend for a long time, but not forever. Because the moment the ground moves with AI and ARM, there's a generation of users who do finally have somewhere else to go. And a company that spent 30 years protecting its position instead of earning the trust and respect will be abandoned by users as soon as they have a choice. Steve Jobs knew that in 1996, and Microsoft is about to learn it in 2026. If you enjoy my content, please consider liking and subscribing. I also encourage you to share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below, even if you disagree with me. I'm Dr. Errol Brandt, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.